You're watching Morning at NTV.
Thank you for staying with us. I'm Romeo Busiku and this is Morning at NTV. Recently, there have been shocking revelations about rape on social media, with victims outing their abusers. What caught our eye was that most of these happened at university, with people girls thought were friends, and the defenses of most of the suspects show that we need to understand what consent really is, because someone coming to your room is not consent at all. Now, the University of Michigan's Sexual Awareness and Prevention Center promotes the use of affirmative consent in its sexual assault prevention education. What is affirmative consent? This is when someone agrees, gives permission, or says yes to sexual activity with other persons. Consent is always freely given, and all people in a sexual situation must feel that they are able to say yes or no, or stop the sexual activity at any point. Now, joining us for a discussion on consent, it's a continuation and fighting rape and culture. We have Marion Chirabo, the gender minister at the Makerere University Guild. She was here yesterday. This is a continuation of that conversation. A very good morning and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Before we dwell into these issues of sexual violence at universities, yesterday, Makerere University Guild leaders, you did host a press conference with students from Chambogo University to talk about the contentious political environment that we are dealing with right now. Can you let us in on some of the major takeaways?
Yes. So basically yesterday we were showing our discontentment with what the state is doing, suffocating Honorable Chagulani. People keep on saying that Makerere is Uganda summarized. What we are seeing, the state intervention, is not different from what we saw last year with the raid on Lumumba, or student leaders coming up to actually voice the issues of their constituencies and being brutalized and being beaten up. For us, it was really, I would say, disgusting to see that the fact that this is the time for actually our political leaders to come and get the views of the people. And that is basically what he wanted to do. He had gotten permission from Parliament, he had gotten permission from the EC, and he had even gone far as putting the police on notice that he's going to consult. So I don't see some of the reasons they are giving are ridiculous. So he consulted in an open space. So he's, of course, these meetings are going to be attended by a big number of people.
Well, the Electoral Commission actually did say, yes, we gave him permission, but we did not allow him to go and break the laws of other institutions.
But what laws was he exactly breaking? Unless, I don't know,
like the Palmer Act.
Unless the Palmer Act does not refuse us from having gatherings. It just tells us to give the police notice, which he did give notice, and so they did give him guidelines.
Was Bobby Wine the only discussion you had yesterday?
No, we also reacted to what the Parliamentary Committee on Education and Sports had said about the 15% increment, and we voiced our disappointment because you know what, people have been making it look like it's a political thing, it's motivated by people power, but I would think that education is should be a basic right for everyone. And education is not a political thing, it's more of an economic thing. I mean, if you're not able to get a degree, would you be here right now?
And at some point we had thought that the violence at Makerere had stopped, the protests had stopped. So with you discussing this 15% cumulative interest increment, does it mean that students will be actually be seen coming out again on the streets to protest?
Yes, because for us, our point from the start has been is that we have a right to affordable education. Our siblings have a right to affordable education. The future generation has a right to affordable education. As it stands now, we cannot afford this. With the levels of poverty, we cannot afford this. The other thing that came out in that press conference was the fact that, again, I would say, Makerere is Uganda summarized, that also us, the administration, has come up to suffocate further students' voices by deciding for us who becomes our next guild president or our next JRC representatives. And we're saying no to that. We're saying as a guild, as a student body, we reserve the right to actually choose our leaders and who leads us. The university can go as far as deciding who a student is, but they cannot decide how students govern themselves. They can give guidelines on around, and we're saying it because of the fact that they have completely shown that they have no lack of respect for basic human rights, like the right to a fair hearing for us. The suspensions show that. And even when Parliament advised them and saw that there was no reason to why they suspended some of these students, they have gone ahead and not actually reinstated these students. They keep on delaying the process. And recently we saw that I don't know if you followed that, where the Vice Chancellor, after the disciplinary committee finding Superior Molly innocent of all that she was accused of, all that she was suspended, the Vice Chancellor goes ahead and appeals that particular decision. So you keep on showing that the administration seems to show this personal vendetta that actually has no merit. So those are not the people that we can put our leadership or the future of the student leadership. We can't put
Understood,
it
Mario. Let's get back to the main conversation, which is sexual violence in universities. The Parliament Committee on Education actually did expedite an investigation, and they did say that most of the students did not come out outrightly to actually report any instances of sexual violence at the university, not at the police, not at the university management, even though there were reports of students being sexually abused during that fracas that actually ensued in November when the students were protesting. You saw the Braydon Lumumba Hall. There was also talk of students being raped, sexually harassed by security operatives in that regard. But then the education committee that was tasked to actually explore this issue, they actually came up with a finding and said these students did not actually report anything. They actually were getting these details from social media. So let's talk about the culture of silence. What actually prompts this culture? Well,
I will also tell you that in particular, one of the findings was that there was no conducive environment for these for the survivors to actually come out. And then I want to make certain
those are the
things
MPs. Yes.
Yeah, that's what the MP said. But then also from a student's point of view, you see, I cannot go to an administration that has showed me consistently that my views are not valid. And they were supposed to make sure they protect my person, but they watched in silence as military came and raided. And even after raiding, they're saying they're not responsible, but they have not apologized for not being able to protect students. How do I go to also an administration that has shown me that really clearly for you, just stay there because we are not interested in what you have to say. You cannot go to your oppressor to seek justice. Secondly, they're saying we have not gone to the police, but I will tell you the thing about the police is that I'll give you a scenario, and this is why the culture of silence continues. One time we had an orientation for first years, and the policeman, he was one who was supposed to speak on behalf of police, and he was supposed to, talk about sexual assault. But he said, don't come to me about any case of rape when you have been found in a boy's room. Cows are for milking. Those were his exact, that was his exact line.
Jesus.
And so if someone gives me that attitude, how then do you expect me to come for them for relief?
I see where you're
because for you have already, your mind is biased. You're already blaming me. You're telling me that the person who violated me had a right to violate me because I put myself in that situation.
So we're dealing with social acceptance of this rape culture.
Exactly that. So it's a bit dicey. That is why you see that some of these cases that victims end up, do not be shocked if after 10 years these rumors actually turn out to be true, that someone was actually brutalized and actually raped by the we as a students guild are giving that the benefit of the doubt that actually these cases might be true. There is no smoke without fire. So I think that basically the authorities need to change also how they view these issues. The police in itself needs to change. This is what allows this rape culture to continue when we start looking at the survivors rather than the perpetrators, and we start giving excuses for them to continue doing what they are doing. But again, I would say that I think generally, if perhaps the administration and the police was more sympathetic to students, they would actually see them come out. And about Parliament, one of the things that when that report came out, they actually said, why don't you provide this conducive environment so that these survivors will be free to come out. Yeah.
So in a nutshell, the students actually were sexually abused, but they were afraid to come out because the agencies they wanted to go to couldn't give them the redress they were seeking.
Well, we did receive reports. I would tell you that we did receive reports. There are actually some students that I talked to. One particularly was found in Lumumba, and she was like, no, there's no way I can come out. The first thing society is going to ask me, what the hell are you doing in Lumumba?
So besides stigmatization, what are the other factors that might prompt or stop someone from coming out their abusers?
Stigmatization is mostly the biggest, but also there is shame on the person themselves, the survivor. There's a way that sexual violence makes you feel like you're degraded, like you're worthless. This person violated you, did not have consideration for your being, your dignity, and just used you and threw you away like that. So usually there is shame that comes with it, but then also shock, the trauma. Some actually, when you look at most reports and research around sexual violence, they will show you that most survivors want to forget the incident. They feel like the more they forget it quickly, the more it never happened, because they cannot deal with the trauma, they can't deal with the nightmares. So they kind of lock it out in their subconscious. And you will see that she will do things unconsciously because of the trauma, but she has not come to terms with what happened to her. And you will find that she would basically finally accept it maybe after 5 years or even after 20 years. Others, they go crazy, and you find actually there was one victim who turned to alcoholism, and when it didn't work, she basically went mad, I would say, and they had to admit her to Butawika for some time. That's how bad it can be. So sometimes it's not because the victims maybe it's not really about, let me say, the victimization, although that plays a very huge role, because you can't be in trauma, then you go out to actually report, and everyone seems to take the person their side other than yours. But also there's a process that you go through mentally to come to that point of, okay, this happened to me, let me report.
Let's talk about the refugees and other destitutes that might be prone to sexual violence. Now, a report that was carried out, a survey that was carried out in February of last year, between February and May last year, indicated that 85% of young girls, refugees, and other adolescents did face some kind of sexual violence in the last 12 months. 85%. That's what was alarming according to researchers, because the last time we had such a high percentage, it was at 53% at the height of the LRA war, insurgency war in northern Uganda. 53% of the girls were being raped in that regard. So in last year, 85%. Why are we seeing so alarming levels of sexual violence now?
Particularly among refugees or generally?
Refugees and destitutes.
Well, I will tell you, like I told you before yesterday, that sexual violence is mostly about power. And what a predator, I would say a sexual predator does, it looks out for those that are most vulnerable. So a refugee or a destitute is very vulnerable. They are not a citizen, they are squatters in your country, and therefore they have less power than, I would say, a citizen. If they were to go to the police, and you know how our police is, that they are not, most likely in most cases they would not get the help they deserve. Secondly, they are strangers to this country, and maybe they do not even know where they can actually get basic help. So a predator would take advantage of that to violate someone, knowing that they can get away with it. And again, research has shown in situations or in cultures mostly where the rapist can get away with it, they keep on doing this act, they keep on repeating this violence, because they know at the end of the day, I'm going to go court-free. This person is not a citizen. This person has nowhere to go. He is depending on the mercy of my country, and therefore he can go away. However, that's not to say that sexual violence cannot take place between refugees and refugees. Again, the same dynamic, you know, they're strangers, and you know, and this happens usually to women, and not to say that men do not also get violated. But you will see that most of these cases are women. And you see, so he was in that situation, the male refugee has maybe more power than the female, and therefore knows that, you know, she has nowhere to go again. The police may not believe her.
In most cases, even when these cases are reported to police and taken to court, court actually sets up like mediation avenues to have families actually discuss these issues out of court. Do you think that actually exacerbates the sexual culture?
That does. It does totally. And that is why you see that, and it's very important for this bill to pass, to protect and look at those nitty-gritties, to protect survivors. And in the bill, it has been outlawed. You are actually liable to about 7 years.
The Sexual Offences Bill 2015.
Yes, because it does not acknowledge, when you do that mediation, you do not acknowledge the fact that what he did was a crime. Do we ever negotiate for murderers? Do we negotiate for thieves? So why are we negotiating for sexual predators? Why are we negotiating for rapists? You're saying that what he did was a minor thing, and therefore the family can easily sort it out. And that is, like I showed you later on, that kind of culture is what prompts the perpetrator to keep on doing it. And you see in some cases, like in Karamoja, those kinds of men have actually used it as a way to get married to women who have rejected them. So that whole thing of mediation in itself is not proper at all. Rape is a crime, and therefore should be punishable and should be punished. Whoever perpetrates it should be punished by the law. Yes.
The Sexual Offences Bill 2015, I actually went and perused through some of the clauses, and actually there's a clause that will actually mandate courts to actually hold these proceedings for the criminals who are accused of sexual violence on camera. Do you think that will be a very good deterrent?
Well, that is
holding proceedings on camera.
That is basically also for why that is that sometimes for the victims, the trauma is too much for them to face their perpetrators. So what basically the framers of the bill are trying to look for ways whereby, first of all, they keep the victim out of harm's way for their mental stability, but also for their physical security. So yes, it's basically to help the survivors be able to be at least emotionally stable to give that testimony. Because sometimes you will find in some cases that she will just freeze and she will not say a word. And it's not because the person did not actually do it to her, but the flashbacks of what happened to her keep on coming, and therefore she's not able to give the credible evidence that she would have given, and that would be that. But I also would like that since 2015 that a particular bill has been revised, and I would tell you to look at the 2019 version of that, because the first...
I looked at it, and the Deputy Speaker right there, Jacob Olanya, did say that there were so many amendments in the bill, and he did advise Amoding to go back and reinstate the original bill, because if you make so many amendments, it changes the whole bill. So he advised Amoding to go back and actually reinstate the amendments in the original bill and then include her own amendments. So that means this might be a lengthy process, and this bill might not take center stage this year, because there is a lot they are still working on to inculcate in this same bill. But then in the interim, what can we do as it is? What can we do in our universities to actually arrest this situation of sexual violence? Because most of the lecturers are having relationships with their students,
Yeah.
but the universities or those institutions do not have policies to guide them on how best to punish the perpetrators. But then, the Parliament of Uganda, the Speaker herself, Rebecca Kadaga, in 2018, around November, she constituted a 9-man investigative team
Yeah.
to go around, assessing the
Yeah.
situation in our universities. And they found that universities did not have any policies to guide them on sexual harassment. There was only one university that had a policy, and that's it's Mbara University. It's Mbara University of Science and Technology, MAST.
Yes,
And Makerere University too. So
yeah.
we're actually looking at 2 institutions. So do you think there is need to introduce policies such as the one at Makerere University and Mbara University School of Science and Technology, so that we rein in on the situation?
Before I go any further, I must commend Makerere University because they have been at the forefront of sexual violence, irrespective of what might have happened during last year and the raid and everything, but they have been at the forefront. They had a policy that they revised, and we have cracked down in partnership with them. We have cracked down on lecturers who have harassed students, and I think you had last year that about 3 were suspended, and actually 1 was fired completely. So Makerere has gone a long way in the fight against sexual violence. At least it has tried.
So let's talk about those institutions
However,
that do not have any policy.
Yeah, I think it's high time that at least the Ministry of Education made it mandatory for these institutions to have this policy against sexual harassment.
By urging them, or by creating a law that actually governs all institutions? By urging them to create their own policies, or by creating a law that actually governs all institutions in Uganda?
think the best thing would create a law.
Yes, to compel
all the institutions. But like we have seen in the sexual offences bill, the time that would take, they could, in the meantime, have a mandatory requirement that you must have a sexual harassment policy. It must be vetted by the ministry to see that it actually works, because the first policy Makerere had was not working. Makerere might be a model in which other universities would follow, but also I think there has to be an amendment to the Employment Act. It has a section that deals with sexual harassment at the workplace, and so, but the trouble with it is that it says that is it beyond a certain number, you can have a policy, you should have a policy. I think it's above when you have 15 employees, is it? So that becomes problematic in the way that that means that they are assuming that if you just have 2 employees, sexual harassment cannot surface in that situation. But also it's between employees and the employer. And that is to say that you cannot have sexual harassment among co-workers, which is problematic. There needs to be an amendment to that particular law, the Employment Act. But also, yes, going again, that I think every institution of learning, whether it is primary, whether it's secondary, whether it's university, should be mandated to have a sexual harassment policy. Either the ministry comes up with a blanket sexual harassment policy, or it mandates each and every institution to have. But also, as the Parliamentary Forum on Youth Affairs, we're working with them to see that we could have an enrichment of our jurisprudence. You see, the problem with, for example, our law as it is does not recognize sexual harassment, I would say. It recognizes indecent assault, but I don't know, the system tends to take it as a very minor offense, and
the sexual offences bill 2015 will handle that, because
yes, it will
even
handle
touching
that.
Someone's thigh is considered sexual harassment
Exactly.
in that bill.
Yes, but as it is going on, as we're trying to amend, because the reason why we made it, because the reason why Parliament amended is because it was missing so many things, things like cybercrime, leaking of nudes and all that, child pornography and all those things. So in the meantime,
revenge porn.
Revenge porn. In the meantime, we are going to file a case on the basis on human rights violation, on the basis of inhuman treatment and cruelty and torture, because for us we feel that the trauma that comes with sexual violence is not something that should be inflicted on a human being.
Indeed.
So we hope that this case would actually enrich jurisprudence in that area while we wait for the sexual offences bill to be passed. And we're urging all survivors that are actually courageous enough to come up to actually join us in this
Indeed.
suit.
Let's talk beyond the policy. Yes,
Yeah.
beyond the policy. Now, the administrators at Mbara University of Science and Technology did say that even though they have a policy, it doesn't matter because sexual violence can continue in that regard because the policies they say are there, but the problem, they are the people in those positions because the people choose to do otherwise, even in the presence of particular laws that bar them from doing certain things. So they were saying that rape is a psychosocial problem which needs to be handled as a social narrative. So they are going to, they're creating social avenues where they bring the young men in the university, talk to them about the issue of sexual harassment. So do you think that's what we need to do beyond policy? Engage the young men?
Yes, I totally agree because what they're doing in essence is promoting positive masculinity. I don't know if you've heard of the word toxic masculinity. I think
I saw an ad by Gillette.
Toxic masculinity, I would say, like I told you before, patriarchy is what promotes this particular vice. It's on the basis that to be a man, you must be dominant and exercise violence. I don't know if you get my drift.
I get your drift very well.
In other words, your desires must come before others, and others usually are the women around you.
It's a power issue.
Yes, it's a power issue, like I said. So basically, you will find that most people from the age of 15 to 49, their first sexual encounters might have been rape because of that belief of growing up that a man must be dominant, his desires come before yours as a woman in most cases. And therefore, because his desires come, he must get what he wants at all. That's why when you see, even when the victims come out, a good number of the public goes on the man's side and starts blaming, oh, what were you wearing? A man cannot control himself and all that. That's where it comes from. So what MUST is doing, and it's not different from also what Makerere is trying to do, promote positive masculinity. Is that what you want to be as a man? What defines who a man is? Are you sticking to those toxic norms of what a man is? A man must respect people, he must respect women, he must not degrade them in any way, he must respect their opinions, their desires, and also their decisions, because at the end of the day, each human being is entitled to their own body. But then I will also say that does not stop there. You'll find in most of these cases, and like the report by Professor Sylvia Tamale said, that usually the people around this perpetrator know that he's doing it. And you'll see in most cases, especially if you follow up the 3 lecturers that were suspended, that they have been doing this for a long time. Their colleagues know that they're doing it, but they have kept quiet. No one has, for the last 10 years, spoken about what he's doing. So
let's wrap up this conversation with the rep myth.
Yeah.
You've heard of the rep myth, where a victim comes out to report an incident of sexual violence, and then the society says, no, you're lying. How has it exacerbated sexual violence?
Well, first of all...
And what can we do to arrest that situation, in a nutshell, as you wrap up?
First of all, it creates a bias. You will see that, and if you check research that was done in the US, that sometimes this rape myth, even with DNA evidence, a judge would look at the witness's demeanor and say that, I don't believe you, it must have been consensual. And yet it was not. Because most of the time, society jumps to the man's side. And again, I've said patriarchy, the belief that a man can do whatever he wants, and irrespective of whether it violates a woman's rights, you see. So most of the times you may go to, there were reports that when okay, they're usually women, but victims of sexual violence, because even if you're a man, the first thing the policeman will do is laugh at you. It's also rooted in the fact of not believing victims, but also that a man cannot be violated. I mean, you must have monopoly over violence.
And one thing I do like about the sexual violence bill is that it will be actually gender neutral.
Yeah,
it won't be focusing on women alone, even the men. So
so
Marion Chirabo is the University Guild right there at Makerere University Guild. She's the gender minister at the university right there, Makerere University Guild in that regard. We've been talking about sexual violence in our universities and how best we can arrest the situation. Consent is a big issue. Yes is yes and no is no. Silence cannot mean yes in that regard. Even though you've taken her to your home and she agreed to enter the house, she did not consent to sex, she can say no. Even though you're already in action 5 minutes into that, she can still say stop it and get off. So if you continue, that will be construed as rape. My name is Romeo Busiku. This is Morning at NTV. Let's take another short breather. We shall return with a lot more.